What does it actually mean to learn? Is it just about passing exams, getting good grades, or is it something much, much deeper, a process that really shapes who we are over our entire life? Well, today, we're going to dive into the Analects of Confucius. We're going to distill some of the most timeless lessons on learning and self-improvement ever written, and we're going to look at him not just as a philosopher, but as a master teacher.
And really, our guide for this entire explainer is this one single powerful statement from Confucius himself. This isn't just him telling his life story. No, this is a personal roadmap for development. It's like a curriculum for a whole lifetime, laying out every stage of his journey from a determined young student to a fully realized sage.
So look at how he breaks this down. At just 15, he sets his heart on learning. That's the start. By 30, he says he stood firm, he had his footing. At 40, no more doubts, he had clarity. By 50, he understood his place in the grand scheme of things. At 60, he could listen to anything and anyone without judgment. And then finally at 70, he could follow his heart's desire, and it was in perfect sync with what was right. This makes it so clear. This is not a race. It's a profound, step-by-step evolution.
Okay, so we've seen the map of this lifelong path. So here's our lesson plan for how we're going to unpack it. First, we'll explore that crucial balance between learning and thinking. Then, we're going to define the ultimate goal of all this education, becoming what's called a junzi, a noble person. We'll see how this works in practice with the idea of filial piety. And then finally, we'll figure out how to turn all this knowledge into masterful action.
All right, let's start with the absolute foundation. If learning is a journey, what's the right way to travel? How do we actually make any real progress? Well, Confucius gives us this brilliant and honestly super concise formula. Right here, this is the core mechanic of his entire educational philosophy. He says, learning without thought leads to being lost. Thought without learning leads to peril. Think about it this way. Just collecting facts without ever stopping to reflect on them? That's kind of like hoarding a bunch of books you never actually read. But on the flip side, just sitting around speculating without any real knowledge to back it up? Well, that's like trying to find your way through a brand new city with no map. You absolutely need both. They have to work together. And this whole journey, it has to begin with intellectual honesty. It's so simple, but so profound. You just can't learn if you're pretending to know things you don't. Admitting you're ignorant about something isn't a weakness. For Confucius, that is the very definition of knowledge. It's like having an empty cup. That's the only way you can fill it.
So, how do you fill that cup? Confucius says, by reviewing the old, one learns the new. This is the real essence of innovation, isn't it? It's not about just throwing away everything that came before. It's about building on it. Really understanding the past is what gives you the insight to create something new for the future. And that, he says, is the mark of a true teacher.
So, okay, we're learning, we're thinking, we're building on the past. But what for? What's the goal of all this hard work? For Confucius, it is absolutely not just about getting a good job or winning a trivia night. It's about becoming a certain type of person.
And that person is the junzi. Now, this gets translated as gentleman or noble person, but the most important thing to get is that it has nothing to do with being born into a noble family. A junzi is made, not born. It's an ideal you achieve through constant self-improvement, moral integrity, and real wisdom.
Now this is one of the most powerful lines in the entire Analects. The noble person is not a utensil. Think about that. A utensil, like a hammer or a cup, it has one very specific job. In our world, which is all about narrow specialization, Confucius says the truly educated person is the exact opposite. They're adaptable, they're wise, they can handle all sorts of situations with grace. They are not just a tool for a single job.
So how can you spot a junzi in the wild? Well, you look for their integrity. They don't make a bunch of empty promises. First, they do the thing. Then, they talk about what they've already done. There's zero gap between what they say and what they do. It's basically walk the walk, and then you can talk the talk.
Okay, so this idea of the junzi is awesome, but let's be real. It can feel a little bit abstract. How do we actually practice this stuff in our day-to-day lives? Well, Confucius uses the concept of filial piety, which is basically respect for your parents, as the perfect training ground for building character.
And what I find so fascinating is that when different students come up and ask him, hey, what is filial piety? He doesn't just give them a textbook definition. No way. This is Confucius, the master educator at work. He tailors his lesson to the specific personality, the specific needs of the student standing right in front of him. Just look at the range of these answers. To one student, He says it's about following the proper rituals. To another, it's about living such a good life that the only thing your parents ever have to worry about is your health. To a third, he warns that just putting food on the table isn't enough. I mean, we do that for our pets. And to the last student, he points out the most subtle, difficult part of all, your facial expression. The respect has to be genuine. You have to see it in your attitude.
So all these different answers, they all point to one single underlying principle, Jing, which means reverence. True filial piety is not about just going through the motions. It's about a deep internal attitude of sincere respect. Without that, all the actions in the world are basically meaningless.
So, let's recap. We've covered the method, learning plus thinking. We've talked about the goal, becoming a Junzi. We've even seen it in practice. So how do we bring it all together? How do we translate all this self-improvement into effective, wise action out in the real world?
Well, when a student asks him how to get a good job, Confucius lays out this really practical 4-step process. First, he says, gather information. Listen and observe as much as you can. Then you have to filter it. Put aside anything that seems doubtful or dangerous. And only then, with what's left over, should you speak and act, and do both with caution. It's just a fantastic model for making any thoughtful decision.
And what's the result of this careful process? Your words will have few faults, and your actions will lead to few regrets. And Confucius argues that when you achieve that level of integrity, success, the position and salary, it just follows naturally. You don't have to chase it. It comes to you because of the kind of person you've become.
Which brings us right back where we started, to the end of that lifelong journey. So what's the ultimate prize? What do you get for decades of learning and thinking and cultivating your character?
You get this, true freedom. But look closely at what kind of freedom this is. It's not the freedom to just do whatever you want whenever you want. It's the freedom that comes when your heart has been so completely shaped by wisdom that what you want to do is always the right thing to do. Your desires and your duties have become the exact same thing.
And that leaves us with one final question for ourselves. Confucius found his moral compass through a lifetime of study and reflection. In our world, with its endless information and constantly shifting values, how do we apply these lessons? How do we build an inner character that's so strong that we too can follow our heart's desire without ever overstepping the line?